When Volkswagen launched the Tiguan in Malaysia, the second generation at least, it was kind of lukewarm. People still preferred the likes of the Honda CR-V and the Mazda CX-8. It wasn't until they launched the Tiguan Allspace with its longer wheelbase and extra 2 seats in the back did the car really take off. As Volkswagen's volume seller in Malaysia, this is a very important model, which is why for 2022 they've been updated. Say hello to the new Volkswagen Tiguan Allspace. My name is Aiman Abdullah, this is Malaysian Motoring, and this is our review of the new updated Tiguan Allspace lineup. Now, before we talk about exteriors, we have to first talk about price. The new Tiguan Allspace 1.4 Elegance now starts at 175,000 ringgit, whereas the 2-litre Allspace R-Line 4Motion, which is quite a long name, now starts at 220,000 ringgit. That actually represents a 10,000 ringgit increase on this side and an 11,000 ringgit increase on this side. Now, whether or not that pushes that out of your budget, well, that depends on you, I guess. But in any case, Volkswagen has tried to package these cars as best as possible to justify that price premium. Now, to talk about the exterior changes, we're going to focus on the 1.4 Elegance. So as standard, both cars now get these IQ lights with a new light signature replete with front sequential indicators and a light bar, which unfortunately only lights up when you have the positioning lights on. It's some legal regulation in this country. It's the same reason that the Hyundai Staria does not have a light bar all the way across all the time. You've lost the front fog lights, however, on both cars, but on this Elegance model, you do get this little bit of a bash plate here, or a pseudo bash plate, again, to make it look a little bit more rugged and adventurous. Now, for the R-Line, you get a much more aggressive face with a bit more chrome and a slightly more pronounced lower underbreather. You've also lost the bash plate. Instead, you have a little bit of black as well as a little bit of chrome trim, again, to highlight the fact that this is the more aggressive vehicle. Now, unique to the R-Line, of course, is this little R badge to denote the fact that you have bought the range-topping Tiguan Allspace, because you wouldn't be spending over 200 grand without everybody knowing it. Now, down the sides of the updated Tiguan Allspace, the differences are minimal, but enough to differentiate the two. So, focusing on the Elegance, you now get 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Pirelli Scorpion Verde tires, and you do get some very prominent body cladding all the way down the side with a little bit of chrome just to break it up. You also get an extended fender arch badge, which on the Elegance says Allspace with a little bit of chrome. Now, on the R-Line, you get 19-inch alloy wheels finished in a dark silver color wrapped in the same Pirelli Scorpion Verde tires, and you lose a lot of the body cladding down the side. You still get the chrome, but a lot of it has been now body painted with the exception of just the wheel arch liners. This is again to give the car a slightly bolder look. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that the R-Line seems to sit ever so slightly lower than the Elegance. Now, we have a suspicion that this might be because the R-Line sits on slightly different suspension. This car comes replete with the dynamic chassis control system, whereas the Elegance comes with a passive setup. That might have something to do with it. Either that or the slightly lower profile tires. We're not sure. If you know, let us know in the comments below. Now, at the back of the new Tiguan Allspace, you get the new IQ lights, which have a slightly different light signature, as well as the animated brake lights that we first saw on the Volkswagen Passat. You also get sequential indicators as standard to match the front end. Now, the difference between the Elegance and the R naturally comes in terms of the aesthetics. So, while both cars get the full width reflector down here, the lower bumper treatment is slightly different. You get dual fake exhaust on the Elegance and you get quad fake exhaust on the R-Line. They are all ultimately fake because the actual exhausts are underneath the bumper pointed down. Now, what is identical is actually practicality. Now, both of these cars come with electric tailgates with a hands-free function. So all you have to do is kick the boot, sort of there, and then it will pop open. Now, with the third row down, you get a very generous amount of space in here. As you can see, we have all of our equipment here and it swallows it up quite well. But even if With the third row up, you'd still have about 220 litres of space or something to that effect, which is actually bigger than some hatchbacks. It also helps that although this boot floor is slightly raised, it does make room to have the tonneau cover underneath. And of course, if you want to load these cars up fully after you've reclined the third row via the little latches on the top of the seats, you also get these little tabs on either side which fold the second row flat, at which point you have a little over 1,700 litres of space. Now, enough about the practicality, because obviously being three-row SUVs, these are very practical cars indeed. Let's talk about the interior, where there are some minor changes to talk about. Now, on the inside of the Tiguan Allspace, we're going to start in the Elegance to point out the differences. So now one of the biggest changes to this interior actually comes in the form of the seats. Now, both the R-Line and the Elegance continue to get leather upholstery as standard, but these seats now come with ventilation and heating. But the ventilation is now three-stage, which means your bum and your back can now be kept cool over longer journeys. On top of that, now both the passenger and driver's seat get power adjustment with lumbar and three-stage memory, which means that you can now have more passengers in here with their presets, like in case you have multiple spouses. Now, in terms of the infotainment system, you still get a 9-inch infotainment system with now wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which is great in case you don't have a USB-C to C cable or C to Lightning cable for an iPhone. Unfortunately, however, it doesn't come with a wireless charger, which is normally the most natural way to pair wireless Android Auto with a phone, because that way you can still charge your phone without having to plug in, which is a bit strange. What is also strange is that they have now updated the climate control system to now use capacitive touch buttons, just like what you get in the Arteon as well as the Passat. Now, while it certainly looks swish, operation on the move is not so great. The tactility of the three knobs that we used to get is unrivaled, and I really wish that they would have retained that. I wish they would have also retained the buttons on the steering wheel, because we now get a new leather wrap steering wheel, which unfortunately comes with more capacitive touch buttons, which is very irritating to use when you're on the road, because the haptic feedback that you get from the steering wheel is not as strong as you might necessarily want. So it's very difficult to figure out whether or not you've actually registered an input. Now, mercifully, however, the steering wheel continues to be both reach and rake adjustable, which means it's very easy to get into a comfortable driving position, and up ahead you still get a very clear instrument cluster, fully digital, with excellent refresh rates and great graphics. It is very customizable, so you can get all the information that you want on it, and it also comes with a little matte layer over it to ensure that there's no glare that gets in your eye line. Now, talking specifically about this Elegance, you get this 100% real synthetic wood trim up there, and you also get this new gear lever. This is shared between both cars. The trim obviously is not. You do get a little bit of ambient lighting, however, which is nice, and unique to this car is this dash top cubby, because in the R-Line there is something in its place. Now, talking about the R-Line, the changes in this car are very minimal. You get slightly different trim, which is made to look kind of like carbon fiber, but it's not very convincing. You get some R badges on the steering wheel and some stitched R badges on the seats, as well as R-Line scuff plates. You also get aluminium pedals for this model to try to make it look a little bit more exciting. Now, there is only one other difference in this car, and it is not these enormous sunglasses holders for all passengers. No, it is the lack of the dash-top cubby, because now there is a speaker there as part of the 10-speaker Harman Kardon audio system, which sounds absolutely fantastic. Now, in terms of practicality, naturally, it's shared with both cars. You get a relatively large glove box, which is now air conditioned as well, so you can keep things cool in here. You get relatively large door bins, which are large enough for bottles. You get a nice center storage area with deployable cup holders, so you can remove the cup holders if you'd like in order to create a large central bin, or you can deploy the cup holders to hold a cup or your phone. You also get a rather small console storage bin here, but you're not going to be using that much because there's also more space up here. You get a couple of USB-C ports here, as well as a 12-volt socket. You get get more USB-C ports in the back. The only difference between these two cars, of course, is this 4Motion badge down here, as well as this mode toggle, which allows you to choose from various different drive modes for off-road settings, as well as a mode button in the middle for you to choose your on-road driving modes. As I said earlier, this car comes with dynamic chassis control as well as different drive modes. So while that car does come with some selectability, this car comes with the option of driving between normal, comfort, eco, and sport. You also get an individual mode for you to play around with various settings in the car should you want the suspension to be stiff or soft, while the engine is in eco and the steering wheel is in sport, or however you might like. Now, in order to talk a little bit more about the practicality, naturally we have to move to the back, where you'll find there is a decent amount of room. This seat is set up in my ideal passenger position. I still have decent knee room and decent headroom. Now, in terms of accoutrements back here, you actually get your own climate control zone, as well as a couple of vents back here. Now, as I said earlier, you get a USB-C port and a 12-volt socket. Now, if you want cup holders, however, they are unfortunately built into the armrest. So if there is a third passenger here, tough. You do get a couple of very large door bins, big enough for bottles, but you have unfortunately lost the very useful tray tables that used to sit in the back of these seats. I guess something has to give when you want front seat ventilation. Now, in terms of the overall comfort back here, these seats can be slid fore and aft, either to make more room for the people in the back or in order to make more room for things. The backrest also can be leaned or smacked forward, or you can lean it further back for you to enjoy a little bit more comfort like this, which would be very useful on a longer journey. Now, for children, of course, you do get ISOFIX mounts here, which don't come with a flappy paddle or cover or anything like that, which means it's very easy for you to put a car seat in, also aided by the fact that the doors in this car are very large. Now, mercifully, both these cars come as standard with VW tint. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with rear sun blinds, which would be a lot more useful for children, very young infants, for example, which can be a bit more sensitive to UV rays, which means, unfortunately, you'll probably have to put a cloth over the window like you find on lots of old cars. Now, in terms of the third row, as much as VW would like you to think that this is a 7-seater, it's more of a 5+2. The third row is more for occasional use only, and even then only for small children over longer journeys. If you want to put adults back there, they're not going to be comfortable for any much longer than about 30 minutes or so. On top of that, back there are absolutely no features, so to speak. There are no aircon vents, there's no plug sockets, nothing, which means that sitting back there, you really do feel like you're in the cheap seats. Now, they're good for practicality in the sense that when you do need a couple of extra seats, you have them. But unfortunately, most of the time, you're just going to be using them as cargo space, because the Allspace does offer a little bit more room for that over the 5-seater, which was discontinued when this car was introduced anyway. Now, enough about that, let's get to driving, because there are more differences for us to talk about. So we'll start with a 1.4 Elegance. So now, driving the Tiguan Allspace 1.4 Elegance. Now, this being the entry-level Tiguan, it comes with a 1.4-litre engine up front, paired to a 6-speed DCT in the middle, with power going to the front wheels. Now, in terms of interior accoutrements, as I said earlier, there isn't really much that you're missing out on. All the basics are here, all the expected niceties like the leather electric seats with ventilation, for example, are all here. Digital instrument cluster, 9-inch infotainment system, it's all here. What isn't here, however, is the larger powertrain with a little bit more output and the 4Motion all-wheel drive system. That's about it. But everything else that you need is here. Now, in terms of a 7-seater family SUV, this car drives pretty well. These Pirelli Scorpion Verde tires do a very good job at kicking up as little road raw as possible, meaning that you can cruise in this car over longer distances and at higher speed with passengers in the car without too much issue. This is, of course, very noteworthy compared to the pre-facelift, where I did note the road raw was of especial notice in this car. In terms of the powertrain itself, it's punchy enough, it's good in town, but it does have a little bit of turbo lag, which means that when you are swinging out in order to overtake, you might need to just give it a second or so as the turbo spools up before it kicks in and gives you the full torque that you're expecting. Now, in terms of visibility, it is very good. The door-mounted wing mirrors, for example, give you great visibility out through the corners. The well-profiled A-pillars as well give you great visibility, although admittedly your over-the-shoulder visibility is slightly hampered due to the rather large D-pillars. But that said, overall, this is a pretty decent car. It's not going to set your heart on fire, but then again, that's not what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be able to carry your family in comfort and quiet and some degree of serenity with all the practical accoutrements that you'd expect, and that's exactly what the Tiguan Allspace Elegance does. It's everything you need and some of the things you want, but it doesn't kind of overburden you with it. What is of note, however, is the fact that because all the buttons in this car for the HVAC controls as well as the buttons on the steering wheel have given way to capacitive touch buttons with haptic feedback on the steering wheel, it is worth noting that manipulating things has gotten a little bit more difficult in terms of, for example, setting the cruise control. That's a little bit more difficult. Changing the track or the volume, for example, has gotten a little bit more difficult. And most annoyingly of all, as with this redesign of the steering wheel, there is no longer a dedicated button to answer or put down phone calls, which is a very odd omission. But overall, I reckon this would be a pretty easy car to live with. Compare this to, say, a base level Mazda CX-8 or a base level Hyundai Santa Fe with the 2.4 litre petrol engine, and no doubt this will be a much more appealing car to you, especially in terms of those who want a little bit more poke on the motorway, who want a little bit more torque while still not having a large capacity engine like what you'd get in the petrol Santa Fe that would waste fuel when you're stuck in town. But let's say you want your 7-seater SUV to have a little bit more poke, a little bit more shove, and a little bit more dynamic capabilities than a 7-seater family SUV should. I think to answer that, we have to jump into the R-Line. Now, jumping behind the wheel of the R-Line, you notice a couple of immediate differences. For one, there's no more turbo lag. So you put your foot down and the 2-litre up front immediately picks up and sings. Now, there is a difference in the powertrain because, as I said earlier, there is a 2-litre engine up front now instead of the 1.4, and it's paired to a 7-speed DCT instead of 6. Power now also goes to all 4 wheels via VW's proprietary 4Motion all-wheel drive system. Now, jumping into this car immediately from the Elegance will reveal that there's a slightly stiffer ride. It's not quite as pillowy soft as the Elegance. And of course, that's not a big deal because in this car I now get dynamic chassis control. And so I can choose between the drive modes, which now have an effect on the suspension. If I go into comfort, for example, this car becomes sublimely smooth, and it just irons out all of the major imperfections in the road, but not at the compromise of body control. And of course, if the mood takes me, I can go into sport, where the suspension stiffens up and ensures that there is absolutely no lean, so to speak, allowing you to make full use of the 4Motion all-wheel drive system. And then of course, there is the acceleration. Which is not only a lot healthier than what you get in the 1.4, naturally, because of the higher outputs, but it's also a lot more satisfying because that noise just, it eggs you on almost. This car is a little bit too fun, I think, for a 7-seater family SUV. I think this is more for the younger buyer who might have been looking at a Mercedes-Benz GLA or a BMW X1, for example, rather than end up in a base model of those two luxury compact SUVs. You might as well get into a flagship version of one of these. As a family car, I think my biggest concern with this would be the fuel consumption, because if you're driving this from day to day, it might not be as frugal as one might want it to be. If I go to my overview here and see just how much fuel we've consumed since we've collected the car, Now, since we've picked it up, this car has done a little over 680 kilometers with another 60 kilometers of range left to go. And the average fuel consumption with traffic and interurban driving and some highway runs and so on has been about 10.7 liters per 100 kilometers. In the 1.4, it was reporting a little bit more, like 8.5 to 8.9 liters per 100 kilometers. This is, of course, a significant and stark difference because obviously the extra firepower means that you do need a little bit of extra fuel. So it really does beg the question, you have to ask, do you need the extra performance? But if not for the performance, there are some other goodies in here that might tempt you towards the flagship Tiguan over the Elegance. I think the biggest draw for me is not the body kit and it's not the bigger wheels, but rather it's the Harman Kardon audio system. See, Volkswagen hi-fi systems have always been quite impressive, but this Harman Kardon system is on another level altogether. It's very full. The sense of surround is surrounding and all-enveloping, and it feels very satisfying. When you're stuck in traffic especially, you can rock out to your tunes and you know that they're being played back on proper high-fidelity audio speakers. This is a really good and easy car to live with. It's just that fuel consumption. And then of course there is the matter of safety. So Volkswagen Passenger Cars Malaysia was very proud that upon relaunching the Tiguan with the facelift, these cars now come with lane keep assist. And admittedly, it is an active lane keep system in the sense that it reads the road and it keeps you in the middle of your lane. It doesn't just sort of beep and bong at you, it actually steers to keep you in lane. And it's always nice when a vehicle can do that. The trouble is, that's the only active safety system in this car. There is no autonomous emergency braking, there is no pre-collision warning, there isn't even blind spot monitoring. The only thing this car has is something like AEB, but only at parking speeds. I know this because when I went down a rather steep ramp, the car braked to stop me from hitting the road. So it begs the question as to why VPCM thinks that it's okay to spec these cars so spartanly. Every time I ask their management, it's always the same response. We are trying to get approval for these cars to offer more active safety features. But who is this approval from? Is it from Germany? Is it from our legislators here? What's the deal? I'd like to try and understand who it is that's stopping Volkswagen passenger cars from being appropriately spec'd for what they are. This is a family car more than anything else, and so I would expect to find things like AEB and blind spot monitoring. Even if just those two, even if not adaptive cruise control and so on, I'd still be able to live with it. But it's just a little bit strange for me that all these active safety features are not present in something that costs north of 200,000 ringgit. And then yes, there is the price. The Tiguan Elegance is now 175,000 ringgit, while this R line now goes for 220,000 ringgit, representing an increase of over 10,000 ringgit for both models. And at that price, you have to ask, what are this car's natural competitors? Well, there's the Nissan X-Trail, which is woeful at best, so we'll just disregard that. You also have the Mazda CX-8 with a 2.5-litre naturally aspirated engine, as well as the Hyundai Santa Fe with the 2.4-litre petrol, as I mentioned earlier, or a spectacular 2.2-litre diesel. Those cars come with blind spot monitoring, although they miss out on the ventilated seats, although I don't think anyone's really going to care when you're only doing 7.8 litres per 100 kilometers on the highway in the diesel. Then, of course, you have the Mazda that I mentioned earlier, which is more dynamic than this. This car feels like it's doing a lot of work to battle the weight, whereas the CX-8 feels very light on its feet. On top of that, there are going to be buyers that will appreciate the simplicity of the 2.5-litre naturally aspirated engine rather than the complexity of this blown four-cylinder, either in the R-Line or in the Elegance, as well as the 4Motion all-wheel drive system that you get in this range topper. And of course, there is the fact the CX-8 is actually a more accomplished 7-seater, and you can also get that car as a 6-seater with 2 very comfortable captain's chairs in the second row. So the question is, who is this meant to appeal to? Well, I guess if you want mechanical simplicity, you're going to go with the Mazda, and frankly, if you're looking for kicks behind the wheel, the Mazda will most likely appeal to you too. But if you like the grunt, and if you want the serenity and the solidity that comes with what can only be described as German build quality and engineering, then unfortunately at this price point, this is all you've got. And maybe that's why this car sells so well for Volkswagen Passenger Cars Malaysia. See, aside from the safety, which I think is a pretty big issue, all the other issues I have with this car are niggles at best. It doesn't detract from the fact that ultimately this is a very accomplished, well-designed and well-engineered vehicle. Sure, the fuel consumption is a little bit high, but have you seen the fuel consumption on a Proton X70? This car runs rings around that, and it's got a lot more firepower to boot. So ultimately, does it make sense if you want one of these? Sure, I certainly like them. I've enjoyed the week that I've spent with both this car as well as the Elegance, because it's given me insight as to just why VW fans are flocking towards the new Tiguan Allspace. I think it is a good car, and it is something that I could recommend. If you are the sort of person that spends a lot of time on the motorway and you want something with a lot of poke to be able to carry you at high speed over long distances with the added convenience of now ventilated front seats to keep your tush nice and cool on those long drives, then this would most certainly appeal to you. But if you're looking for something with a little bit more in the way of active safety, then perhaps rather than disregard this car, maybe you should petition Volkswagen Passenger Cars Malaysia to update these cars with the safety features that they so rightfully deserve, because I think that little update will make a world of difference. Anyway, that's been our review of the 2022 Volkswagen Tiguan Allspace, Elegance and R-Line. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe. Jangan bodoh.